Oni wiped sweat from her forehead as she balanced three heavy food trays on her arms. The bus was crowded again today. People pushed against her, making it hard to protect her carefully prepared dishes. But Oni never complained. This was her life as the most talented caterer in Enugu. Everyone in the city knew about Oni's cooking. Her jollof rice had a special taste that made people close their eyes when they took the first bite. Her meat pies were so flaky and perfect that wealthy families fought to hire her for their parties. Oni's hands could turn simple ingredients into magic. What nobody understood was how hard Oni worked behind the scenes. Every morning before the sun rose, she stood in her small kitchen preparing food. Every evening, her back ached from standing all day. And every time she had to deliver food to an event, she faced the same challenge: no car. "Excuse me, please," Oni said softly as she squeezed through the crowded bus. A man stepped on her foot, nearly making her drop a tray of delicate pastries. Oni bit her lip and kept moving. She couldn't afford to show frustration. Her reputation depended on appearing professional at all times. Today was especially important. Chief Okao, one of the wealthiest men in Enugu, had hired her to cater an exclusive dinner. His mansion sat far outside the city, where buses didn't go. Oni had spent nearly half her fee hiring a taxi to take her there. "Stop here for gas," the taxi driver said, pulling over at a station. This was the second stop already. Oni checked her watch nervously. She was cutting it close. Later, at a police checkpoint, the officers took their time examining the driver's papers. Oni sat quietly in the back seat, watching precious minutes tick by. The food was still warm in its insulated containers, but for how long? By the time they arrived at Chief's mansion, Oni's dress was damp with sweat. The beautiful makeup she had applied that morning had mostly melted away, but none of that mattered now. She had a job to do. Taking a deep breath, Oni straightened her back, put on her brightest smile, and carried her food trays into the kitchen entrance. The house staff looked at her with surprise. "You're the caterer?" one woman asked, eyeing Oni's slightly disheveled appearance. "Yes," Oni replied with dignity. "Please show me where I can set up." Once in the kitchen, Oni worked with the speed and precision of a master. Her hands moved quickly, arranging dishes, adding final touches, making everything look perfect. The kitchen staff watched in amazement as the tired woman they had just met transformed into a confident professional. When the first guests tasted her food, the compliments began flowing. "Who made this incredible dish?" they asked. "Chief, you must tell us about your caterer." From his seat at the head of the table, Chief Okao observed everything. He noticed how elegantly Oni served each guest. He saw the pride in her eyes when people praised her cooking. And most importantly, he had seen her arrive, exhausted and struggling with her heavy trays. After the last guest departed, Oni began packing her empty containers. Her feet ached, but she felt satisfied. The event had been a success. Now she just needed to wait for another taxi to take her home. "Oni," called a deep voice. She turned to see Chief Okao standing in the doorway. "Yes, sir," she replied, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. "You did an amazing job tonight," he said with a warm smile. "The food was exceptional." "Thank you, sir," Oni said, her heart filling with pride. Chief looked at her thoughtfully. "However, I noticed how difficult it was for you to get here." Oni felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Had her struggles been that obvious? "A talented professional like you should have reliable transportation," Chief continued. He gestured for her to follow him. Confused but curious, Oni followed Chief outside to his garage. Inside sat a row of luxury vehicles, more cars than Oni had ever seen owned by one person. Chief walked toward a gleaming black SUV and placed his hand on its hood. "This one sits here gathering dust. I barely use it." Oni stared, not understanding what he meant. "Take it," Chief said simply. Oni's eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. This is too much, Chief, she finally managed to say. Chief shook his head. It's nothing to me. My garage is full of cars I rarely drive. You can have it, or leave it here to keep gathering dust. Tears filled Oni's eyes. In an instant, her biggest problem was being solved by a stranger's generosity. No more struggling on buses. No more expensive taxis. Her business could grow without transportation holding her back. Thank you, sir, Oni said, dropping to her knees in gratitude. May God bless you abundantly. Chief smiled and handed her the keys. It's yours now. Oni drove home that night in a daze. The SUV was so comfortable, so smooth on the road. She couldn't believe it belonged to her. When she parked outside her small house, neighbors gathered around, touching the shiny black paint with amazement. Oni, is this really yours? Her friend Uchi asked, running her hand over the car's sleek hood. Yes, Oni said, still hardly believing it herself. Chief Okao gave it to me. For days afterward, Oni would stop in the middle of her work just to look out the window at her beautiful new car. Her life had changed in an instant. No more struggles with public transport. No more arriving at events tired and sweaty. Business would be so much easier now. What Oni didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this gift wasn't the blessing it appeared to be. The black SUV had a history. It carried secrets darker than its shiny paint. And soon, it would draw Oni into a mystery that had been hidden for 5 long years. But for now, she was simply a hardworking caterer whose biggest dream had unexpectedly come true. A week passed, and Oni's life changed completely. Each morning, she woke up earlier than usual just to admire her new car. The black SUV stood proudly in front of her small house, looking out of place among the modest buildings around it. Neighbors still stopped to stare whenever they walked by. Some even took pictures beside it when they thought no one was watching. For Oni, the car meant freedom. No more waiting for buses in the hot sun. No more begging taxi drivers to help with her heavy food containers. No more arriving at events with her nice clothes wrinkled and damp with sweat. When a large catering order came in from a neighboring town, Oni felt excited rather than worried. This was the perfect chance to take her new car on a longer trip. The night before, she prepared all the food with extra care, knowing she wouldn't be rushed in the morning. This is going to be my first big delivery with you, she whispered, patting the car's steering wheel before going to bed. It seemed silly to talk to a car, but Oni couldn't help feeling that this vehicle was more than just metal and leather. It was the answer to years of prayers. Morning came, and Oni loaded the car with trays of beautifully prepared food. Everything fit perfectly in the spacious trunk. She climbed into the driver's seat, breathing in the rich smell of leather, and started the engine. The car purred to life, powerful and smooth. Today is going to be wonderful, Oni said to herself as she pulled onto the main road. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with gentle strokes of orange and pink. Few cars were on the road this early, making the drive peaceful. About 30 minutes into her journey, something strange happened. The car's radio suddenly switched on by itself. Oni frowned. She hadn't touched any buttons. Static filled the speakers for a moment, then cleared. Must be an electrical problem, Oni muttered, reaching to turn it off. But before her fingers touched the button, she heard something that made her hand freeze in midair. A whisper, so faint she almost couldn't hear it. A voice repeating an address, over and over. 15 Udoka Street. 15 Udoka Street. 15 Udoka Street. Oni's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know that address. She pressed the button, and the radio went silent. Just a glitch, she told herself, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. These fancy cars have complicated electronics. She continued driving, but now the peaceful feeling was gone. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing at the radio, half expecting it to turn on again. Her phone rang, breaking the uncomfortable silence. It was her customer, wondering where she was. I'm on my way, Oni assured her. About 20 minutes away. Just as she ended the call, the steering wheel suddenly became stiff in her hands. The car lurched to the right. What? Oni gasped, fighting to keep control. But the steering had locked somehow. The car picked up speed. No, 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 Oni whispered, her voice rising with panic. She pressed the brake pedal, but nothing happened. The car was now driving itself, taking turns Oni hadn't planned, heading in a direction she didn't recognize. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she tried everything: the brakes, the emergency brake, even turning off the ignition. Nothing worked. The car had taken control, and all Oni could do was hold onto the wheel, her knuckles white with fear. After 10 terrifying minutes, the car slowed down and came to a complete stop. Oni sat frozen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Slowly, she looked out the window to see where she was. A street sign caught her eye, Udoka Street. The blood in Oni's veins turned to ice. The car had brought her to the exact address she'd heard whispered on the radio. Her phone rang again, her customer, now angry and impatient, but Oni could barely hear it through the roaring in her ears. This can't be happening, she whispered, her hands trembling on the wheel. Cars don't just drive themselves, but this one had. And now it sat silently, as though nothing unusual had happened. Oni took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself. Perhaps there was a logical explanation. Maybe the car had some kind of automatic navigation system that had malfunctioned. But that didn't explain the whispering voice on the radio. She looked around. She was in a quiet residential area she'd never visited before. The house at number 15 was well maintained, with a small garden in front. A car was parked outside, and Oni could hear faint voices coming from inside. Curiosity mixed with her fear. Why had the car brought her here? What was special about this address? Gathering her courage, Oni stepped out of the car on shaky legs. She approached the house, not sure what she would say, but feeling drawn to find answers. She knocked on the door. After a moment, a young man answered. He looked to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes that quickly turned wary when he saw a stranger at his door. I'm sorry to disturb you, Oni began, her voice steadier than she felt. My car broke down right in front of your house. I wondered if you knew a mechanic nearby. The man's expression changed instantly. The friendly caution vanished, replaced by something Oni could only describe as terror. He took a step back, looking past her at the black SUV parked by the roadside. You came in that car? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Oni nodded, confused by his reaction. Yes, it's mine. Well, it was given to me recently. The color drained from the man's face. His eyes widened, and his body began to tremble slightly. Get away from me, he said, his voice rising. Don't come near me again. Before Oni could respond, he slammed the door in her face. Oni stood frozen, staring at the closed door. What had just happened? Why was the stranger so terrified of her car? She walked back to the SUV, her mind racing. Something was very wrong. The car that had seemed like such a blessing now felt like something else entirely. There was a history here she knew nothing about, connections she couldn't understand. Her phone rang again. Her customer, furious now. The event was starting, and there was no food. Oni got back into the car, half expecting it to refuse to start, but it turned on normally, and to her surprise, allowed her to drive it away from Udoka Street without fighting her. She arrived at the venue an hour late, facing an angry customer with crossed arms and a cold glare. I'm so sorry, Oni stammered, trying to explain what had happened without sounding crazy. There was a problem with my car. What kind of behavior is this? The woman snapped, cutting her off. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Oni unloaded the food as quickly as she could, apologizing repeatedly. But the damage was done. This customer would never hire her again and would likely tell others about Oni's unreliability. As she worked, Oni felt a strange sensation on her back, a cold, crawling feeling. She reached around to brush it away, but there was nothing there. The feeling intensified, spreading to her arms. Oni looked down at her hands and had to bite her lip to keep from screaming. Hundreds of tiny worms were crawling over her skin, appearing from nowhere, their pale bodies writhing as they covered her arms, her hands, everywhere. Her vision blurred with terror. She swept frantically at her arms, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. The worms kept coming, multiplying, crawling up her neck, onto her face. Are you okay? Someone asked from what seemed like a great distance. Oni looked up, still batting at the worms. The customer was staring at her with a mix of anger and concern. I, I, Oni couldn't form words. She looked down at her arms again. The worms were gone. Her skin was clean, unmarked. There was nothing there. I need to go, Oni whispered, backing away. I'm sorry. I don't feel well. She fled to her car, tears of confusion and fear blurring her vision. Was she losing her mind? First the car driving itself, then the terrified man, and now hallucinations of worms. Oni sat in the driver's seat, her hand shaking too badly to put the key in the ignition. She needed to get home, to think, to make sense of what was happening. Get in, a voice whispered from the car radio, which had turned on again by itself. Oni froze. She hadn't imagined it this time. A voice had definitely spoken to her from the radio. No, she said out loud, her voice trembling. This isn't real. She twisted the key in the ignition, desperate to get away. The car started, but when she tried to turn onto the main road, the steering wheel jerked in her hands. Once again, the car was taking control. Please, Oni begged, tears streaming down her face. Please stop this. But the car didn't listen. It drove steadily through unfamiliar streets, ignoring Oni's attempts to regain control. When it finally stopped, Oni found herself back at 15 Udoka Street. She sat in the car, too afraid to move. Why was this happening? What did this address mean? Who was the terrified man? And most importantly, what was wrong with this car? The car doors suddenly locked with a loud click. Oni pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Let me out, she cried, pounding on the window. But there was no one to hear her on the quiet street. The radio came to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, more insistent. Find the truth, it whispered. Find the truth. Oni closed her eyes, tears flowing freely now. The blessing she had received a week ago had transformed into her worst nightmare. And somehow, she knew this was just the beginning. Morning light filtered through Oni's bedroom curtains. She hadn't slept. How could she, after what happened yesterday? The car had finally released her from its grip, allowing her to drive home. But even now, parked outside her house, it seemed to watch her, waiting. Oni's phone buzzed on her nightstand. 3 missed calls from yesterday's angry customer. 5 messages from other clients wondering if she was available for upcoming events. Her business was thriving, but right now, cooking was the last thing on her mind. The car held secrets, dark secrets that were somehow connected to that house on Udoka Street and the terrified man who lived there. Oni needed answers. She made herself a cup of strong tea and sat by her window, watching the black SUV. It looked completely normal in the morning light. Expensive, beautiful, harmless. Yet Oni knew better. Something was wrong with that car. Something that went beyond mechanical problems or electrical glitches. I need to look inside it again, she whispered to herself, gathering her courage. Properly this time. Her friend Uchi's voice echoed in her head. Girl, You're crazy if you go back into that car. But what choice did she have? The car wasn't going anywhere, and neither were the questions burning in her mind. Taking a deep breath, Oni stepped outside. The morning was quiet, only a few neighbors stirring. She approached the SUV cautiously, half expecting it to roar to life at her approach. But it remained still. With trembling hands, she unlocked the car. Nothing happened. No whispering voices, no sudden movement, just the click of the door unlocking. Oni began searching. She checked under the seats, in the glove compartment, behind the sun visors. Nothing unusual. The car was clean, well maintained, and completely normal, except for the fact that it had driven itself and spoken to her yesterday. Then she remembered she hadn't checked the trunk. She pressed the button on her key fob, and the trunk popped open with a soft click. At first glance, the trunk looked empty, but as Oni leaned in, she noticed a small gap between the carpet lining and the side panel. Something was tucked inside. Heart pounding, she reached in and pulled out a scarf. It might once have been beautiful, expensive silk with delicate patterns, but now large, dark stains covered most of it. Stains that could only be blood. Oni dropped the scarf as if it had burned her. Her breath came in short gasps as she stared at it lying on the ground beside the car. This wasn't just a haunted car. This was something far worse. "What did Chief give me?" she whispered, backing away. "What happened in this car?" She picked up the scarf using a plastic bag, careful not to touch it directly. Whatever this was, she needed to keep it as evidence. Evidence of what? She wasn't yet sure. Back inside her house, Oni paced back and forth, the bag scarf sitting on her table like an accusation. The car had brought her to that specific house for a reason. The man had been terrified of the car for a reason. And now, a bloodstained scarf hidden in the trunk. She needed help. She needed someone who might know something about the car or its previous owner. Just as she was considering who to call, she glanced out her window and froze. A car was pulling out of Chief's driveway across town. Oni would never have noticed except for one heart-stopping detail. The driver was the same terrified man from Udoka Street. "What is he doing at Chief's house?" Oni whispered, pressing her face against the window to get a better look. The man drove away quickly, glancing nervously in his rearview mirror, as if afraid of being followed. Something connected these people. The car, the house, Chief, the terrified man, and a blood-stained scarf. Oni knew she needed to talk to someone who had connections, someone who knew the history of the city and its powerful people. She remembered her friend Uchi mentioning an old mechanic named Baba J, who had helped her track down a stolen car when even the police couldn't find it. If anyone knows something, it's Baba J, Oni said to herself, grabbing her phone. An hour later, Oni sat in Baba J's cluttered office behind his mechanic workshop. The old man wiped his greasy hands on a rag as he studied her face. "So Chief gave you this car?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly from years of smoking. Oni nodded. "Yes, just last week. He said it was gathering dust in his garage." Baba J's expression darkened. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the black SUV parked outside. "And you say strange things have been happening? The car driving itself? Voices?" "Yes," Oni said, leaning forward. "And yesterday I found this." She placed the bag scarf on his desk. Baba J glanced at it, but didn't seem surprised. He sighed heavily, as if a great weight had settled on his shoulders. "My daughter," he began in a low voice, "this car has a very dark story. A story I believe that you haven't been told." Oni felt her heart pound harder. "What do you mean?" Baba J walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a stack of old newspapers. He rifled through them until he found what he was looking for, then spread it out on the desk in front of Oni. "Look," he said, tapping his finger on a headline. Oni leaned forward and read, "Daughter of prominent businessman missing." Below the headline was a photo of a beautiful young woman standing beside a black SUV, the exact same car now parked outside. Chinelo Okao, Baba J said quietly. Chief's only daughter. She disappeared 5 years ago. This was the last car she was seen in. Oni felt the room spin around her. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Chief's daughter, she whispered. But then why would he give me her car? Baba J's eyes were sad. That's the question, isn't it? After Chinelo disappeared, strange rumors started circulating. What kind of rumors? Oni asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Some said Chief was involved in her disappearance. That he, Baba J hesitated, lowering his voice. That he sacrificed her. Sacrificed? Oni repeated, horror filling her chest. Baba J nodded grimly. For wealth. Chief's business empire grew dramatically in the months after Chinelo vanished. People noticed. They talked. Are you saying Chief killed his own daughter for money? Oni could barely form the words. I'm not saying anything for certain, Baba J replied carefully. But many believe the car was part of it somehow. That's why he kept it all these years, unable to sell it or get rid of it. And now, suddenly, he gives it to you. Oni remembered the car's strange behavior, the mysterious address, the terrified man, and now this blood-stained scarf. It all pointed to something terrible. The car is trying to tell me something, she said quietly. It's been taking me to a specific house on Udoka Street. And today, I saw the man who lives there leaving Chief's mansion. Baba J's eyes widened slightly. Then perhaps the car is trying to reveal the truth about what happened to Chinelo. Oni felt sick. What had seemed like a generous gift now felt like a curse. Or worse, like being used as a pawn in something sinister. What should I do? She asked. Be careful, Baba J warned. If Chief is involved in his daughter's disappearance, he's more dangerous than you know. But, he paused, considering. There is someone else who might help you. Who? Chief's wife, Lady Foma. I've heard she's been planning to leave him. Rumors say she suspects him of dark dealings, but has never had proof. Oni remembered seeing Lady Foma at events she had catered. A proud, elegant woman who always seemed slightly detached from her husband. If she's already suspicious, Baba J continued, and you bring her evidence, she might help you uncover the truth. Oni thought about the bloodstained scarf in the bag. Was this the evidence Lady Foma needed? As she drove home, in a taxi, not the SUV, Oni called her friend Uchi and told her everything. Are you insane? Uchi exclaimed when Oni finished her story. You need to return that car to Chief immediately and pretend none of this ever happened. I can't, Oni said firmly. Chinelo deserves justice. Her spirit is trapped. Uchi. The car is her way of reaching out. There was silence on the other end of the line before Uchi sighed. Fine. I'll help you. But we need to be smart about this. Uchi worked at an upscale spa that Lady Foma frequented. Through her, they might find a way to approach Chief's wife safely. I overheard her talking to her friend last week, Uchi said. She mentioned seeing a lawyer about divorce papers. She's definitely planning to leave Chief. Then she might be willing to help us, Oni said, hope flickering in her chest for the first time since this nightmare began. That night, Oni couldn't sleep again. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Chinelo's face from the newspaper photo. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her, standing beside the car that would become her tomb, and later, her voice from beyond. In the morning, Uchi called with a plan. Lady Foma had an appointment at the spa that afternoon. Uchi would make sure Oni got a chance to speak with her privately. Hours later, Oni sat in the spa's luxurious waiting area, her heart hammering in her chest. This was their chance to find an ally who had both the motivation and the resources to help uncover the truth. Lady Foma arrived precisely on time, elegant in a tailored suit that emphasized her slender frame. She barely glanced at Oni as she spoke to the receptionist. Uchi appeared, greeting Lady Foma warmly before guiding her toward the treatment rooms. As they passed Oni, Uchi made a small gesture with her hand, the signal they had arranged. Oni stood up and followed them to the private relaxation area. Now she just needed the right moment to approach Lady Foma. She waited until Lady Foma was seated alone in the relaxation lounge, sipping herbal tea while waiting for her treatment. Men like Chief Okao think they can do anything and get away with it, Oni said casually, loud enough for Lady Foma to hear. Lady Foma's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as she studied Oni. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice quiet but intense. Oni met her gaze steadily. "I said men like your husband think they can do anything and get away with it." Lady Foma put down her teacup slowly. "And what would you know about my husband?" "I know about Chinello," Oni said, lowering her voice. "And I know about the car." Lady Foma's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing shock before her face returned to its carefully neutral expression. "People have been talking about Chief for years," Lady Foma said dismissively. "They say he's involved in all sorts of things, but no one ever has proof." Oni leaned closer. "I have proof." Lady Foma froze, her eyes searching Oni's face. "What kind of proof?" "His daughter's car. He gave it to me last week, and I found something inside it, something that will prove he was responsible for Chinello's disappearance." For a long moment, Lady Foma said nothing. Then, slowly, she moved to sit beside Oni. "Show me," she whispered. Oni described everything: the car's strange behavior, the dress it kept taking her to, the bloodstained scarf, the terrified man she'd seen at both the house and Chief's mansion. With each detail, Lady Foma's expression grew darker. "I've suspected for years," she finally said, her voice barely audible, "but I could never find evidence. He's too careful." "Will you help me?" Oni asked. "Together, we might uncover the truth about what happened to Chinello." Lady Foma studied Oni carefully before nodding. "Yes, but we must be extremely cautious. First, secure that scarf. It's the physical evidence we need. Keep it somewhere safe, not in your house." Oni promised she would. They exchanged phone numbers, and Lady Foma made Oni memorize a secure messaging code they would use in case Chief monitored her communications. "Be careful," Lady Foma warned as they parted. "My husband is more dangerous than you know." That night, Oni returned home feeling both terrified and hopeful. They had a plan now. Lady Foma would use her access to Chief's personal files to look for connections to the house on Udoka Street and the man who lived there. Meanwhile, Oni would secure the blood-stained scarf in a safe deposit box Uchi had arranged. But when Oni pulled into her driveway, her blood ran cold. The black SUV was gone. She jumped out of the taxi, looking frantically around her property. The car had been parked right there when she left. She was certain she had locked it. She'd even taken the keys with her. "No, no, no," Oni whispered, spinning in a circle, as if the massive vehicle might be hiding somewhere in her small yard. With trembling fingers, she called Uchi. "The car is gone," she gasped when her friend answered. "What? Did someone steal it?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it moved itself." There was silence on the other end. Then Uchi's voice, low and urgent. "The scarf. Where is it?" Oni's heart sank. "In the trunk. I was going to move it to the safe deposit box tomorrow." "Oni, listen to me," Uchi said, her voice deadly serious. "Get out of that house now. Come to my place immediately." The fear in her friend's voice sent chills down Oni's spine. If the car was gone, and with it their only evidence, what did that mean? Had Chief somehow discovered what they were doing? As Oni grabbed her purse and ran back to the waiting taxi, one thought burned in her mind. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. Uchi's apartment was small but comfortable, with colorful curtains and the smell of vanilla incense in the air. But tonight, neither woman could appreciate these comforts. Oni sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Uchi paced back and forth, stopping occasionally to peek through the curtains at the street below. Do you think Chief knows? Oni asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Uchi shook her head. I don't know, but the car disappearing right after you met with Lady Foma, that can't be a coincidence. Maybe the car moved on its own again, Oni suggested, though even to her ears the explanation sounded weak. The car had shown strange powers, but to completely disappear. We need to call Lady Foma, Uchi said, reaching for her phone. Oni grabbed her wrist. No, what if Chief is monitoring her calls? We could put her in danger. Uchi lowered her phone, nodding slowly. You're right. We should wait for her to contact us using the secure messaging code she gave you. The women jumped at a sudden knock on the door. They froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. The knock came again, louder this time. Who is it? Uchi called, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer. Just another knock, more insistent than before. Uchi moved silently to the kitchen and returned with a knife. She gestured for Oni to hide in the bedroom while she approached the door. I said, who is it? Uchi demanded, gripping the knife tightly. The wooden door splintered open with a deafening crack. Uchi screamed and stumbled backward as four men burst into the apartment. They wore dark clothes and masks, and each carried a gun. Don't move. One of them barked, his gun trained on Uchi. Oni rushed out of the bedroom, then froze when she saw the armed men. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Please, she begged, raising her hands. We don't have anything valuable. Quiet, ordered the man who seemed to be their leader. He was taller than the others, with broad shoulders and eyes that glinted coldly through his mask. Where is it? Where is what? Uchi asked, still clutching her kitchen knife, though it seemed pathetically inadequate against their guns. The scarf, the leader replied. Where is the blood-stained scarf? Oni's blood turned to ice. These weren't random thieves. They knew about the scarf, which meant they knew about the investigation. Chief had found them out. It was in the car, Oni said truthfully, her voice trembling. But the car is gone. It disappeared this afternoon. The leader took a step closer, studying her face. You're lying. I'm not, Oni insisted. I swear it. The car was parked outside my house when I left this morning. When I came back, it was gone. The man's eyes narrowed behind his mask as he considered her words. Finally, he nodded to his men. Search the place. Tear it apart if you have to. The other men holstered their guns and began ransacking Uchi's apartment, pulling out drawers, emptying cabinets, flipping over furniture. Oni and Uchi stood pressed against the wall, watching helplessly as the home was destroyed. After several minutes, one of the men returned to the leader. Nothing, boss. No scarf. The leader stared at Oni for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and pulled off his mask. Oni gasped. The face beneath the mask was familiar, a face she had seen years ago. A hungry, desperate face that had once approached her after a catering event, begging for food. You, she whispered, recognition flooding through her. You're the man I fed at the Okonkwo wedding. The leader's expression softened slightly. You remember me? Yes, Oni said, her mind racing back to that day 3 years ago. A skinny man in tattered clothes had approached her after most guests had left. He hadn't asked for leftovers. He had simply stood there, hunger etched into every line of his face. Oni had given him a full plate of food, and then packed extra for him to take home. You gave me food when everyone else pretended not to see me, the man said, his voice quieter now. You treated me with dignity. The other armed men looked at their boss in confusion. One of them stepped forward. What do we do with them in Mecca? Emeka, the leader, seemed torn, his eyes moving between Oni and his men. Finally, he sighed heavily and holstered his gun. Let them go, he said. What? One of his men protested. But our orders, I said let them go. Emeka repeated firmly. The other men slowly lowered their weapons, clearly confused but unwilling to challenge their leader. Oni's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. You work for Chief? She asked. Emeka shook his head. No, I work for someone else. Someone even more dangerous. A chill ran down Oni's spine. Who? Emeka hesitated, glancing at his men, then lowered his voice. Lady Foma. The room seemed to tilt around Oni. Lady Foma? She repeated, certain she had misheard. But she's helping us investigate Chief. She wants to bring him down for what he did to Chinello. A bitter laugh escaped Emeka's lips. Is that what she told you? That she wants to help? Oni nodded, confusion washing over her. She said she suspected Chief was involved in dark dealings. That she's planning to divorce him. Oh, she's planning to leave him all right, Emeka said grimly. After she's taken everything he has and eliminated anyone who knows the truth. What truth? Uchi asked, finding her voice at last. Emeka looked around the wrecked apartment, then gestured for them to sit. You both deserve to know, especially since your lives are now in danger. Oni and Uchi sat on the overturned sofa, while Emeka perched on the edge of a table. His men remained standing, watchful, but no longer threatening. Everyone in Enugu believes Chief killed his daughter for ritual money, Emeka began. That's exactly what Lady Foma wanted people to think. You mean Chief is innocent? Oni asked, struggling to keep up with these revelations. Of his daughter's murder? Yes, completely innocent. Emeka's face darkened. But Chinello wasn't really his daughter. What do you mean? Oni leaned forward, hanging on every word. The day Lady Foma gave birth at St. Mary's Hospital, her baby died, Emeka explained. But she couldn't bear to tell Chief. He was so excited about having a child, and she was afraid he might leave her if she couldn't give him one. So she paid off a nurse to switch her dead child with another newborn baby. Oni gasped. That baby was Chinello. Emeka nodded solemnly. Yes. For years, Lady Foma raised this child as her own, though she never truly loved her. Chief, however, adored Chinello. He doted on her, gave her everything. As Chinello grew older, Chief's love for her only increased. Eventually, he changed his will, leaving most of his fortune to Chinello instead of Lady Foma. So Lady Foma was jealous, Uchi said, the pieces falling into place. More than jealous, Emeka continued. She was furious. She had lived in Chief's shadow for years, enduring his control over their finances, his social dominance. And now everything was going to a girl who wasn't even her real daughter, a girl who could expose her deception if the truth ever came out. So Lady Foma killed Chinello, Oni whispered, horror filling her chest as she realized how thoroughly she had been deceived. Yes, Emeka confirmed. In that black SUV. I was there that night, working as Lady Foma's driver back then. I watched it happen, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. Tears welled in Oni's eyes as she imagined the young woman's final moments. And Chief? What does he know? Nothing, Emeka said. He believes Chinello ran away. Lady Foma convinced him that Chinello had grown tired of his controlling nature and left to build her own life somewhere far away. Chief was heartbroken, but he kept her car, hoping she might return someday. The room fell silent as Oni absorbed these revelations. The car hadn't been trying to frighten her. It had been trying to reveal the truth about its owner's murder and the address it kept taking her to. The house on Udoka Street, she said suddenly. Is that where Chinello is buried? Emeka nodded grimly. In the backyard. The man living there, Maxwell Opina, is Lady Foma's lover. They've been having an affair for years. He helped her dispose of Chinello's body. Uchi made a small, distressed sound. That's why he was so afraid when he saw the car. He recognized it. Exactly, Emeka said. When Lady Foma found out Chief had given the car away, she panicked. She knew the car might lead you to Maxwell's house, to where the body is buried, so she sent you to get the scarf. Oni concluded. The evidence that could connect her to the murder. Yes. But now I'm going to help you instead. Emeka stood up and gestured to his men. We're leaving, but you two need to disappear. Lady Foma will send others when we don't return. Wait, Oni said desperately. Help us bring her to justice. Help us prove what she did to Chinello. Emeka hesitated. It would mean betraying the most dangerous woman in Enugu. It would mean doing the right thing. Oni counted. For Chinello. For Chief. For yourself. For a long moment, Emeka said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. These are photos of where Chinello is buried. And this, he handed Oni a piece of paper with an address written on it, is where Lady Foma keeps records of all her illegal activities, including payments to Maxwell and the nurse who switched the babies. Oni took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you. Don't thank me, Emeka said grimly. Just survive. Take this evidence to the police, not the local station, but the State Criminal Investigation Department. Ask for Officer Don Lottie. He's not on Lady Foma's payroll. With that, Emeka signaled to his men, and they left as quickly as they had arrived, disappearing into the night. Oni and Uchi stared at each other in stunned silence, the apartment a wreck around them, the envelope of evidence clutched tightly in Oni's hands. What do we do now? Uchi finally asked, her voice small. Oni looked down at the envelope, then back at her friend. The past few days had been a nightmare. The haunted car, the bloodstained scarf, the terrifying confrontation with armed men. But now finally, she understood what was happening. Chinello's spirit had been trying to reveal the truth, to find justice after 5 years in an unmarked grave. We do exactly what Emeka said, Oni replied, a new determination hardening her voice. We take this evidence to the state Cid. We bring Lady Foma to justice. We give Chinello peace. Uchi nodded slowly. We should go now, before Lady Foma realizes her men have betrayed her. They quickly gathered what they needed. The envelope of evidence, some money, Uchi's car keys. As they prepared to leave, Oni paused at the door, turning back to look at the ransacked apartment. We're doing the right thing, aren't we? She asked, suddenly overwhelmed by the danger they were facing. Uchi squeezed her shoulder. Yes, Chinello deserves justice, and Lady Foma deserves to pay for what she did. Together, they slipped out into the night, two ordinary women now carrying evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful and dangerous people in the city. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but there was no turning back. Not now. Not when they knew the truth. As they drove toward the state Cid headquarters, Oni thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. All she had wanted was a car to make her work easier. Instead, she had become entangled in a 5-year-old murder, a web of lies, and a spirit's desperate quest for justice. Do you think the car will come back? Uchi asked, breaking the silence. Oni gazed out at the dark streets passing by. I don't know, but somehow, I think it's watching over us, helping us, just like it's been trying to help Chinello all along. Let's hope it keeps helping, Uchi said quietly, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Ahead of them, the lights of the city glowed against the night sky. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, Lady Foma was waiting, powerful and dangerous. But she wasn't all-knowing. Not yet. And in this moment, Oni and Uchi had one advantage she didn't. The truth. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The State Criminal Investigation Department was housed in a gray concrete building that looked more imposing in the darkness. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Oni and Uchi sat in hard plastic chairs, waiting for Officer Don Lottie. It was nearly midnight, but the police station buzzed with activity, officers coming and going, phones ringing, the occasional shout from the holding cells at the back. Oni clutched the envelope of evidence tightly, her knuckles white. Every time the door opened, she flinched, half expecting Lady Foma's men to burst in. Uchi sat beside her, checking her phone every few minutes. "What if Lady Foma finds out where we are?" Oni whispered. "She won't," Uchi said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not yet, anyway." Finally, a tall, stern-faced officer approached them. "I'm Officer Donlottie," he said. "I understand you have information about a murder case." Oni swallowed hard and stood up. "Yes, a 5-year-old case. Chinelo Okaw's disappearance." Officer Danlottie's eyebrows rose slightly. "Chief Okaw's daughter? That case went cold years ago, because the wrong person was suspected," Oni said, handing him the envelope. It wasn't Chief who killed her. It was his wife, Lady Foma." The officer's face remained impassive as he opened the envelope and examined its contents. His eyes widened slightly as he studied the photographs of the burial site and the documents showing the financial transactions. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing. Oni hesitated, then decided on the truth. "From one of Lady Foma's men, someone who was there when Chinelo was killed but couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Officer Donlottie studied the women carefully. "Do you understand what you're doing? Lady Foma is one of the most powerful women in this state." "We understand," Uchi said firmly. "But Chinelo deserves justice." The officer nodded slowly. "Wait here." He disappeared into an office, taking the envelope with him. Oni and Uchi exchanged nervous glances. Had they made the right decision? Would the police even believe them? 20 minutes later, Officer Donlottie returned, followed by a more senior officer with gray hair and a weathered face. "I'm Detective Superintendent Musa," the older man said. "Officer Donlottie has shown me your evidence. If this is authentic, it's extremely serious. It's real," Oni assured him. "Lady Foma killed Chinelo and buried her body at 15 Udoka Street, the home of her lover, Maxwell Opina." Detective Musa nodded gravely. "We'll need to verify this independently, of course. But if what you're saying is true, this is a major breakthrough in a case many thought would never be solved." He gestured to a nearby office. "Come with me. I need to take your official statements. Then we'll assemble a team to investigate the burial site." As they followed the detective, Oni felt a wave of relief wash over her. Someone was finally listening. Someone with the power to do something about it. Inside the small office, Oni and Uchi took turns explaining everything. The car's strange behavior, the blood-stained scarf, Baba J's information, and finally Emeka's confession. Detective Musa recorded everything, asking occasional questions to clarify details. "This car," he said when they had finished. "You believe it was haunted by Chinelo's spirit?" Oni nodded, knowing how crazy it sounded. "I know it's hard to believe, but the car led me to the burial site repeatedly. It was trying to reveal the truth." To her surprise, Detective Musa didn't dismiss her claim. "In my 30 years as an officer, I've seen things that can't be easily explained. Sometimes justice finds its own way." After completing their statements, Detective Musa outlined the next steps. "We'll send a team to 15 Udoka Street immediately to secure the location and search for the remains. I'll also have officers track down this Maxwell Opina for questioning. As for Lady Foma," his face grew serious, "she's powerful and connected. We'll need to build an airtight case before making any move against her. That means finding Chinelo's remains and getting Maxwell to testify." What about us? Uchi asked. Lady Foma knows we have evidence against her. She sent armed men after us once already. We'll place you in protective custody, Detective Musa assured them. You'll stay here tonight where it's safe. Tomorrow, we'll move you to a secure location until this is resolved. As dawn broke, news came in from the team at Udoka Street. They had found human remains buried in the backyard, exactly where the photos indicated. Forensic experts were working to identify them, but the preliminary evidence suggested they belonged to a young woman who had been dead for approximately 5 years. Detective Musa brought coffee to Oni and Uchi, who had spent an uncomfortable night dozing in office chairs. We found the body, he told them quietly, and Maxwell Opina is in custody. He tried to flee when our officers arrived, but they caught him at a roadblock. Oni felt dizzy with a mixture of grief and vindication. So it's really her? It's Chinello. We'll need DNA confirmation, but yes, it appears to be her, Detective Musa replied. Maxwell is already talking, trying to save himself. He claims Lady Foma masterminded everything. What about Chief? Uchi asked. Does he know yet? The detective shook his head. We've brought him in for questioning, but we haven't told him what we found. We need to be careful about how we handle this. If Lady Foma realizes we're closing in on her, she might run. Throughout the morning, the police station buzzed with activity as officers came and went. Forensic reports arrived, and strategy meetings were held in the conference room. Oni and Uchi remained in the small office, protected but increasingly anxious. By mid-afternoon, news channels began reporting on a major development in the long-cold case of Chinelo Okau's disappearance. They mentioned that human remains had been discovered at a private residence in Enugu, but didn't name Lady Foma or Maxwell. It's starting, Uchi said, watching the news on her phone. Once this breaks fully, there's no going back. Oni nodded, a strange calm settling over her. Good. The truth needs to come out. Just then, Detective Musa burst into the office, his face grim. We have a problem. Lady Foma is gone. Gone? Oni repeated, her heart sinking. What do you mean? She's disappeared. When our officers went to bring her in for questioning, the house staff said she left early this morning with several suitcases. Claimed she was going to visit her sister in Lagos, but we've checked. She never arrived there. Uchi clutched Oni's arm. She's running. It appears so, Detective Musa agreed. We've issued alerts at all airports, bus terminals, and border crossings. Her accounts have been frozen, but she has resources, friends in high places, safe houses we don't know about. Oni thought about the wealthy, elegant woman she had met at the spa. Lady Foma had seemed so convincing, so genuinely concerned about bringing Chief to justice. But it had all been an act, a desperate attempt to eliminate the last people who could connect her to Chinelo's murder. What about Maxwell? Oni asked. Is he still cooperating? Detective Musa nodded. More than cooperating. He's confessed to helping Lady Foma dispose of Chinelo's body, though he claims he didn't participate in the actual murder. He's given us details about their relationship, their plan to falsely implicate Chief, everything. And what did Chief say when you told him? Uchi asked quietly. A shadow passed over the detective's face. He collapsed, had to be taken to the hospital. Finding out his wife murdered his daughter, it was too much for him. Oni closed her eyes briefly, her heart aching for the man who had shown her such kindness, who had spent 5 years believing his beloved daughter had abandoned him. We need to find Lady Foma, she said firmly, opening her eyes again. She can't get away with this. We're doing everything we can, Detective Musa assured her. But she had a head start, and she knows people. Rich people can disappear when they want to. Over the next few days, the case became the biggest news story in Nigeria. Prominent businessman's wife wanted for murder of daughter screamed the headlines. Photos of Lady Foma appeared everywhere, along with shocking details of the case: the baby switch at birth, the affair with Maxwell, the plot to inherit Chief's fortune. Meanwhile, forensic tests confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains found at Maxwell's house belonged to Chinelo Okao. The cause of death was strangulation, and fibers found on the remains matched the bloodstained scarf that had been in the car's trunk. The car that had now mysteriously reappeared, parked outside the police station one morning as if it had driven itself there. Chief recovered enough physically to attend a press conference where he publicly thanked Oni for her courage in bringing the truth to light. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow with grief, but there was also relief there, the relief of finally knowing what had happened to his daughter. "Janelle can rest now," he said, his voice breaking, "and I can begin to mourn her properly." But Lady Foma remained at large. Despite the nationwide manhunt, there had been no confirmed sightings. Some speculated she had fled the country using a false passport. Others believed she was being hidden by powerful friends who owed her favors. "It's not fair," Oni said one evening, as she and Uchi sat in the safe house where the police had relocated them. "After everything she did, she might actually get away." Uchi squeezed her friend's hand. "The whole country is looking for her. She can't hide forever." Oni wasn't so sure. People with money and connections could sometimes disappear completely, starting new lives under new identities in places where no one knew them. That night, as Oni drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of the black SUV. In the dream, the car was driving through an unfamiliar landscape, following a specific path only it knew. When it stopped, Oni found herself looking at a secluded villa surrounded by high walls and lush gardens. Somehow, she knew Lady Foma was inside. Oni woke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid, so real. Was it just her subconscious processing events? Or was it something more? A final message from Chinelo's spirit. She shook Uchi awake. "I know where she is," Oni said urgently. "What?" "Who?" Uchi asked groggily. "Lady Foma. I saw it in a dream. But it wasn't just a dream. It was like the car was showing me." Uchi sat up, fully awake now. "Oni, it was just a dream." "No," Oni insisted. "It was more than that. I need to talk to Detective Musa." Despite Uchi's skepticism, Oni convinced her to call the detective. When he arrived at the safe house an hour later, Oni described the villa from her dream in as much detail as she could remember. The architectural style, the surrounding landscape, even the unusual wrought iron gate with a design of intertwined leaves. Detective Musa listened patiently, taking notes. When Oni finished, he studied his notepad thoughtfully. "This actually matches a property we've been investigating," he said slowly. "A villa outside the city owned by a shell company. We couldn't connect it directly to Lady Foma, but one of our informants mentioned she might be using it." Oni's heart raced. "That's it. That's where she is. I'm certain of it." The detective looked at her curiously. "You said this came to you in a dream?" "Guided by the car." Oni nodded, knowing how it sounded. "I know it's hard to believe, but I think Chinelo is still trying to help us find justice." To her surprise, Detective Musa didn't dismiss her. "At this point, I'll take leads wherever they come from. We'll increase surveillance on the property immediately." Within hours, the police had confirmed that someone matching Lady Foma's description was indeed staying at the villa, along with a male companion believed to be a private security guard. Detective Musa assembled a tactical team for a pre-dawn raid. "We can't risk letting her slip away again," he told Oni and Uchi when he returned to update them. "We'll move at 4 a.m. when they're least likely to be alert." "Can we come?" Oni asked impulsively. "Not for the raid itself," she added quickly, seeing his expression, "but to be nearby, to see her brought to justice." Detective Musa hesitated, then nodded. "You can wait in one of our vehicles at a safe distance. After all, None of this would have happened without you two. In the dark hours before dawn, Oni and Uchi sat in an unmarked police car parked on a dirt road half a kilometer from the villa. They could just make out the silhouettes of officers taking positions around the property, moving silently through the shadows. I can't believe this is really happening, Uchi whispered. When you walked into my spa that day, talking about a haunted car, I thought you were losing your mind. Oni smiled faintly. Sometimes I thought the same thing. At precisely 4 a.m., the raid began. Even from their distance, they could hear the commands being shouted, the sound of the front door being forced open. Flashlights cut through the darkness as officers swept through the villa. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. Then their police radio crackled to life. Target secured, came a voice through static. Repeat, target secured. No casualties. Oni leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes as relief washed over her. It was over. Lady Foma had been caught. Justice for Chinello was finally within reach. As dawn broke, casting golden light over the landscape, they watched as officers led two people from the villa in handcuffs. Even from a distance, Oni recognized Lady Foma's elegant posture, though her usual poise was gone, replaced by a defeated slump to her shoulders. We did it, Uchi said quietly, taking Oni's hand. Chinello can rest now. Oni nodded, tears filling her eyes. All because of a car. A car that wouldn't let the truth stay buried. As if summoned by her words, Oni noticed a vehicle parked on the road leading to the villa, a black SUV that hadn't been there minutes before. Even at this distance, she knew it was the same car, somehow finding its way here for this final moment of justice. Look, she whispered to Uchi, pointing. As they watched, the first rays of morning sunlight hit the car, making its black paint gleam. For just a moment, Oni thought she saw a figure sitting in the driver's seat, a young woman with a peaceful smile. Then the vision was gone, leaving only an empty car bathed in golden light. Goodbye, Janello, Oni whispered. Rest in peace now. And somehow, she knew that finally, after 5 long years, Chinello would. Lady Foma sat in the interrogation room, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her usually perfect hair disheveled. The regal bearing that had intimidated so many was gone, replaced by the desperate look of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed. Across the table, Detective Musa watched her with steady eyes. We have everything, Lady Foma. Maxwell's full confession, the nurse who helped switch the babies, financial records showing your payments to both of them, and of course Chinello's remains. Lady Foma's face remained blank, as if she had retreated deep inside herself. There's no way out of this, the detective continued. The best thing you can do now is tell us the full truth. For a long moment, Lady Foma said nothing. Then she raised her eyes to meet the detective's. The full truth. A bitter smile touched her lips. The truth is that I lived in a man's shadow for 25 years. I endured his control, his rules, his public humiliation when he took mistresses. She leaned forward slightly. And when I finally had something he wanted, an heir, my own body betrayed me. My baby was born dead. So you took someone else's child, Detective Musa said quietly. Lady Foma nodded. I was desperate. Chief would have left me if I couldn't give him a child. The nurse suggested the switch. There was a poor woman who had just given birth. She wouldn't be able to provide for her baby anyway. And for years, you raised Chinello as your own, the detective prompted. I tried, Lady Foma said, her voice hardening. But she was never truly mine. She looked nothing like me or Chief. And as she grew older, Chief loved her more than he ever loved me. He gave her everything. So you killed her out of jealousy? Lady Foma's eyes flashed. I killed her because Chief changed his will. Everything, everything I had worked and suffered for, was going to be left to her. A stranger. Someone who wasn't even our real daughter. Detective Muse's face showed no emotion. And Maxwell helped you. Maxwell loved me, Lady Foma said, though there was doubt in her voice now. At least, I thought he did. He helped me dispose of the body. He kept my secret for 5 years. Until he turned on you, the detective noted. Just like you turned on Chief. Lady Foma fell silent, the truth of his words hanging in the air between them. Outside the interrogation room, Oni and Uchi watched through the one-way glass, their faces solemn. Chief stood beside them, his face gray with grief and shock. I never knew, he whispered. All these years, I believed Chinello had run away because I was too controlling. I blamed myself. Oni's heart ached for him. This man who had shown her such kindness had been deceived in the cruelest way possible by the woman he had trusted most. You gave her a good life, Chief, Oni said gently. You loved her as your own daughter. Chief turned to her, his eyes filled with tears. She was my daughter, in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. He looked back through the glass at his wife, the stranger he had shared a home with for decades. I never knew Lady Foma felt so bitter. She hid it well. Some people do, Uchi said quietly. They hide darkness behind beautiful faces. Days later, the formal charges were filed against Lady Foma. First-degree murder, identity fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Maxwell Opina faced similar charges, though his cooperation with authorities would likely reduce his sentence. The nurse who had helped with the baby switch had died years ago, but investigators managed to track down Chinello's birth mother, a woman named Ada, who had never stopped wondering what happened to the baby she was told had died at birth. When Oni met Ada at the police station, she saw a woman worn down by life's hardships, yet with a quiet dignity that reminded her of Chinello's photo. She had your smile, Oni told her, bringing fresh tears to Ada's eyes. I knew somehow, Ada whispered. I knew my baby wasn't dead. Mothers can feel these things. The case made headlines across Nigeria. The story of Lady Foma's deception and crimes captivating the public imagination. But for those closest to the events, the media attention was just noise surrounding a very personal tragedy. Chinello was given a proper burial at last, in a quiet ceremony attended by Chief, Ada, Oni, Uchi, and a few others who had helped bring the truth to light. Chief and Ada, two strangers connected by a daughter one had raised and one had lost, stood side by side at the grave, united in grief and relief that justice had finally been done. After the funeral, Chief approached Oni. The car, he said, the one I gave you. I believe it should go back to where it belongs. Oni nodded, understanding what he meant. The black SUV, which had appeared and disappeared so mysteriously throughout their investigation, was now parked permanently outside the police station, where it had last delivered its final clue. I think Chinello's spirit can rest now, Oni said. The car has done what it needed to do. Chief smiled sadly. I'm having it destroyed. Not because I want to forget Chinello, I never could, but because no object should be trapped between worlds the way that car was. As life slowly returned to normal, Oni found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had gone from a struggling caterer to someone who had helped solve a 5-year-old murder, all because of an unexpected gift that had turned out to be both a curse and a blessing. One evening, as she prepared food for a small event, her phone rang. It was Emeka, the man who had once been Lady Foma's enforcer and who had ultimately helped them uncover the truth. I just wanted to thank you, he said, his voice gentle, for giving me the chance to make things right. You saved our lives, Oni reminded him. If you hadn't recognized me from that day, that's what I wanted to talk about. Emeka interrupted. That day, when you gave me food when I was hungry, that simple act of kindness changed something in me. Even when I started working for Lady Foma, I never forgot it. Oni smiled, remembering the desperate young man she had fed years ago. never imagining that this small gesture would one day save her life. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I'm leaving Enugu," Emeka replied. "Starting fresh somewhere people don't know my past. But I wanted you to know I'll carry your kindness with me." After they said goodbye, Oni continued preparing her dishes, thinking about how strangely life had unfolded. She had always believed in working hard and being kind, never expecting anything in return. Yet somehow, that kindness had come back to her when she needed it most. A month later, Oni received a surprising invitation from Chief. He wanted her to cater a special dinner at his home, a dinner to honor Chinello's memory and to thank those who had helped uncover the truth. When Oni arrived at the mansion, memories of her first visit flooded back. How tired she had been after struggling with public transportation, how Chief had noticed her difficulties and offered her the car. "Welcome, Oni." Chief greeted her warmly at the kitchen entrance. "It's good to see you again." As Oni set up her cooking station, she noticed changes in the house. Photos of Chinello that had been hidden away were now displayed proudly, and there was a new portrait in the main hall, a painting of Chinello standing beside both Chief and Ada, the family that might have been in a kinder world. The dinner was intimate, with just a few guests: Detective Musa, Uchi, Baba J, Ada, and Chief himself. As they ate Oni's delicious food, they shared stories about Chinello, how she had loved music, how she had wanted to start her own business one day, how her laugh could brighten any room. To Chinello, Chief said, raising his glass, "May she rest in peace." And to Truth, Detective Musa added, "Which always finds a way to surface." After the meal, as Oni was packing up her things, Chief approached her with a small box. "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing it to her. "Not a car this time." Oni opened the box to find a set of keys and some documents. She looked at Chief questioningly. "It's the deed to a small building near the market," he explained. "Perfect location for a restaurant. I thought someone with your talent should have her own place, not just catering at other people's events." Tears filled Oni's eyes. "Chief, this is too much." Chief shook his head gently. "No, it isn't. You helped bring my daughter justice. You gave me answers I had sought for 5 years. This is the least I can do." As Oni drove home that night, in her own small car, purchased with her savings, she thought about everything that had happened and the lessons she had learned. Truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. Lady Foma had thought her secret was safe, hidden away like Chinello's body in Maxwell's backyard. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, sometimes through unexpected means, like a haunted car that refused to keep silent. Kindness returns in unexpected ways. Oni had fed a hungry man once, never expecting anything in return. Years later, that same man had saved her life. Small acts of compassion create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. And finally, greed and jealousy destroy everything they touch. Lady Foma had everything most people dream of: wealth, status, a husband who had once loved her, but it wasn't enough. Her jealousy of a child who wasn't even her own had consumed her, eventually costing her everything. The next morning, Oni visited the small building Chief had given her. It needed work: new paint, better kitchen equipment, proper tables and chairs. But as she stood in the empty space, she could already see what it would become: a place where she could share her cooking with the world, a dream she had carried since she first learned to make jollof rice in her mother's kitchen. She would name it Chinello's, she decided, a reminder that justice had been served, that truth had prevailed, and that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. Outside, the city of Enugu was waking up. People hurried to work. Children walked to school. Market vendors set up their stalls. Life continued, as it always does, even after the most extraordinary events. And somewhere, Oni liked to think Chanelo's spirit was finally at peace, free from the car that had carried her secrets for so long, free from the need for justice that had kept her bound to this world. Rest well, Chanello, Oni whispered as she locked the door to her future restaurant. Your story will not be forgotten.